So who is to blame for the Sam Bankman-Fried FTX scandal? Is it Sam Bankman-Fried himself? Is it the universe? Is it God? Is it his parents? Is it the great spaghetti monster in the sky? That's what we're going to be here to discuss in this micro episode of the Sense and Signal podcast. My name is Dan Tarker, one of your co-hosts, and I find this aspect to the Sam Bankman-Fried story endlessly fascinating and almost literary in a way, because it has that element of irony we look for in literary works. And it almost makes you wonder, is there somebody out there, some consciousness scripting this whole reality that we're kind of fumbling through? Or are we just projecting our own literary projections onto a chaotic and meaningless universe, hoping to make sense of it? And that question gets to the heart of this part of the Sam Bankman-Fried story, because it is about ontology. It is about how we view the nature of the universe and reality. And I think that's an incredibly fascinating aspect of the story, and it is filled with irony. So let's get to the headline. About 10 years ago, in 2013, Sam Bankman-Fried's mother, Barbara Fried, who is a professor of economics at the Stanford School of Law, published a paper, and excerpts of it were published in the Boston Review. The paper was called Beyond Blame, and in that paper, she is arguing that we are all basically blameless. Now, she is what is called a hard determinist. So you might remember determinism from your maybe religious teachings, or you might remember it from your history classes. It's very similar to the whole idea of Calvinism, that from a theological point of view, that God has preordained everything and we are just going through the motions in a highly scripted universe, and that we don't have free choice. And that's where Fried is coming down in this paper, not from a religious point of view, but more from a secular scientific point of view. The hard determinist position, which is the Barbara Fried position, is that the universe was set in motion by the Big Bang, by whatever it might be, and that because all those forces are logically flowing from each other, all the causes and effects are happening in a way that is impossible to change. Everything that is going to happen is inevitable, based on the flow of the universe, the domino effect of one thing happening and going down the line, and that we have, therefore, no free will. We are just agents caught up in a complex environment where we have no agency in a sense. And so the irony, of course, is that she makes this argument, and she makes it for, of course, a lot of social justice reasons. If you read the article, she makes a lot points to the incarceration industry in this country, which we know is broken, and that we have too many people locked up, and that, many of them do have mental health issues, or are coming from disadvantaged sociological backgrounds, or being impacted by systemic racism and things like that. So we know that is the case. And her argument takes it to an extreme and says all of those people incarcerated actually have no agency. They are just cogs in the system, this machine that is the universe. They had no choice in what they did to land themselves in prison. So we should not hold them blameworthy. We should not even really be punishing them, is the subtext of her article, because what she's really campaigning for is to get rid of this concept of blame and praise, which is a philosophical discussion around the concept of free will. So if you have no agency, you can't be blamed. And at the same time, you cannot be praised for the things that you do right, because they are just a logical consequence of the system moving forward and those dominoes falling. So some examples that they might use to illustrate this. So let's say there's a driver who's going down the street. We're going to call him Smith, because I think Smith is often the name used in some of these thought experiments. Smith is driving a school bus down the street. He gets a little bit distracted. A kid runs out of into the middle of the street. Smith swerves to miss the kid, maybe runs up onto the sidewalk to miss the kid and actually hits and kills somebody else. Now, is Smith to blame? Well, he was a little bit distracted, so maybe he is to blame. But the hard determinist would say no. Smith is absolutely not to blame. And I'd say a lot of us would also say he's not really to blame too. The kid ran out in the street, even though you might have that variable that he was a little bit distracted by something on the bus. Wouldn't really have society come crashing down on his head saying, Smith, we're sending you up the river. Now, if he was drunk and driving and distracted and texting while he was driving, then those are causal factors that we might look at and cast blame on this person as a society. But Bankman-Fried's mother, Barbara Fried, would argue, no, that actually isn't the ethical standard that we should have, and that we need to start as a society creating change by pushing back on the concept of blame and saying we need to release all these people from prison, and we need to change the criminal justice system so it's less blame focused. Well, she publishes this in 2013. 10 years later, irony, her son, Sam Bankman-Fried, is arrested and has been convicted of conspiracy and fraud. And so the question is, from her ontological framework, from her worldview, is her son to blame for what's happened? And is she to blame for what's happened? And her husband, is he to blame? Are they to blame for any of Sam Bankman-Fried's actions? They benefited financially from FTX. They own a house in the Bahamas because of it, and I believe the people who've taken over FTX to try and retrieve the money that has been lost and make the people who lost their investments whole, they're going after Bankman-Fried's parents. And justifiably so. They've benefited financially from it. They may have been involved in some of the practices at FTX, and they were certainly potentially involved in funneling a lot of money to the Democratic Party. So are they to blame as well? It seems fascinating and ironic and hypocritical on from Barbara Fried's position to be arguing that there is no such thing as blame and that we need to erase it from our vocabulary and from our mindset and create a change where we start to view the world as complex and have a nuanced perspective on these types of issues. And on one level, I can agree with that. I do believe that we tend to view the world in a from a teleological perspective. And for those who don't know, teleological is a mindset that we all possess, which is very cause and effect and right and wrong. And this happens because of this happens, and that you can make moral judgments based on people's actions. And we know that is problematic. A non-teleological view would look at multiple variables for a different situation and try to come to an understanding of a particular phenomena from a complex perspective. How are all these different variables interacting with one another? But I think we're coming back to the human perspective, where you have an agent like Sam Bankman-Fried, who is very privileged. He's not coming from a situation like somebody who's sitting in prison in Folsom County for cocaine possession, who might have been peddling cocaine and coming from a background of generational poverty and might be suffering from mental health issues and trauma from his upbringing. Sam Bankman-Fried is not that person. Sam Bankman-Fried committed white-collar crime, not physically harming anybody, certainly harming people's bank accounts, and that's painful to a lot of people, especially if you lost all of your savings and retirement and all that labor that you put into accruing that capital. That is psychologically and emotionally painful and traumatizing too. And I could see, looking at it from a health perspective, I'm sure it's going to have negative health consequences on the people who have been impacted by this. But it's not physically harming them, but it's still doing harm. And Sam Bankman-Fried, without a doubt, needs to be held accountable. And it's hard when you look at a particular case like his, where he has agency, he has the moral perspective to be able to understand right versus wrong. And he's not being forced into doing any of these activities because he's flat broke or coming from a place of poverty, because his parents were wealthy to begin with. They were professors at Stanford University. They were definitely well off, if anything. So it definitely creates a lot of irony about her stance back in 2013, and has to make us wonder, and I've seen other people post about this too, did she indoctrinate Sam Bankman-Fried with this worldview that he is blameless no matter what happens, no matter whether if he's leaking his ex-girlfriend's diaries and writings and personal writings to the New York Times? Is he blameless for that because he's just following the natural progression of the dominoes that are falling in this particular situation? I have a hard time with that. So this is a fascinating dimension of the story. I'd love to hear more about what you think about Sam Bankman-Fried and his parents and their culpability in this whole FTX scandal. I think it has a lot to say about how we view the world, how we view a criminal justice system, and how we view people in the workplace too, which is one of the central focuses of this leadership and sense-making podcast. Do our employees have agency? Do they have free will? Because that's going to determine how you treat them. If you think that they are just emergent properties in a complex system with no agency, and that they are manifesting certain behaviors and doing certain things because that is the only choice they have given the constraints of the universe, the reality that they're working in, then you can't hold them to blame, because a lot of this has to do with this whole notion of a libertarian sense of freedom. In any situation, do you have a choice to actually make an alternative decision around an action? And if you don't have that choice, if all the constraints have you bounded to such a degree, then you don't have a freedom of choice. You don't have free will. And so that is the question, whether you're dealing with an employee in the workplace who might be behaving badly. Then if they are just behaving badly, and it's not because of free will, it's not because they have choice, it's just because of the constraints of the system, then how do you deal with that? I guess you could change the system. But it gets very murky and very complex. And I think the other aspect of this has to do with just how our society as a whole has been constructed. What Sam Bankman-Fried's mother was posing is profoundly radical. And that was pointed out by a professor at Princeton University who responded to her post, and that was Gideon Rosen at Princeton University. And I'm just going to read a quick paragraph about his response to her article. Let's be clear, this is not the moderate claim that we should be less vindictive, tempering blame with compassion and with the recognition that there is always more to the story. We can all accept that, right? And he's warning, this is not that moderate claim. It is a radical claim that we are all perfectly innocent, morally speaking, in the same sense in which a schizophrenic driven by hallucination, by command hallucinations, is innocent. No matter how sane you are, no matter how privileged your circumstances, whatever you do, you cannot help it. And if you cannot help it, it's not your fault. So is that Sam Bankman-Fried? I know what I think. I think it is his fault. I'm interested to hear what you think. Leave a comment down in the comment section. Subscribe if you like these micro sense and signal leadership and sense making podcasts. And I'll see you on the next one.